It all began on a quiet, moonlit night. The kind of night where the air feels too still and the silence seems to hum. Emily had just finished her late shift at the diner, her boots clicking on the empty pavement as she made her way home. She lived in a small town where nothing ever happened, or so she thought. As she walked along the dark country road, she noticed the stars seemed unusually bright. They almost looked alive, flickering and pulsing as if trying to send a message. Emily paused for a moment, staring up at the vast, endless sky. Have you ever looked at the stars and felt like they were watching you? She shook off the feeling and continued walking. The road stretched out in front of her, empty and silent except for the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. That's when she saw it, a light in the distance, hovering just above the treetops. At first, she thought it might be a plane, but it didn't move like one. It was too steady, too deliberate. The light grew brighter as it approached, and Emily stopped in her tracks. Her heart raced, but she couldn't look away. It wasn't just one light anymore. There were several, arranged in a perfect circle, glowing a soft blue that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling. She wasn't sure who or what she expected to answer, but the silence that followed was deafening. The lights hovered closer, and suddenly, a beam of light shot down, illuminating the road in front of her. It was impossibly bright, yet it didn't hurt her eyes. Instead, it felt warm, almost inviting. Against every instinct screaming at her to run, Emily took a step forward, then another, and another. Before she knew it, she was standing directly under the beam. That's when she felt it, a tingling sensation like static electricity crawling over her skin. She tried to move, to step out of the light, but her body wouldn't respond. She was frozen in place. Have you ever felt completely powerless, like your body doesn't belong to you anymore? That's how Emily felt at that moment. And then, with a rush of air, she was lifted off the ground. The world around her blurred as she was pulled into the light. She felt weightless, as if she were floating in water. When the movement stopped, she found herself in a strange, glowing room. The walls shimmered with an iridescent light, and the air was thick and heavy, like a humid summer day. There was no visible source of light, yet the room was bright. She looked around, her fear growing with every passing second. The room was empty except for a single table in the center. It looked like it was made of liquid metal, shifting and rippling even though it held its shape. Before she could process what she was seeing, she heard a sound behind her. It was soft, almost like a whisper, but it sent chills down her spine. Emily turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat. Standing before her were three beings. They were tall and thin, with smooth, pale skin that seemed to glow faintly. Their eyes were large and black, and when they looked at her, she felt as though they could see straight into her soul. One of them stepped forward, raising a hand. It didn't speak, but Emily heard a voice in her mind. "Do not be afraid." But she was afraid. How could she not be? She tried to speak, to ask where she was and what they wanted, but no words came out. The being tilted its head, as if studying her, and then the voice in her mind continued. "You have been chosen." Chosen for what? Emily wanted to scream, but she was paralyzed. The other two beings approached, and suddenly, she felt herself being lifted again. This time, she was placed on the table. The surface was cool against her skin, and she realized she was no longer wearing her clothes. She was covered in a thin, metallic sheet that seemed to mold to her body. The beings moved around her, their long fingers hovering just above her skin. Wherever they passed, she felt a strange warmth, as though they were scanning her. She tried to move, to scream, to do anything, but her body wouldn't cooperate. The voice returned to her mind. "We mean you no harm. We seek understanding." Understanding? Of what? Emily's mind raced. She wanted to believe them, but everything about this situation felt wrong. Then she saw it, a device hovering above her. It looked like a sphere, with tiny, glowing tendrils that reached out and brushed against her temples. As soon as it made contact, her mind exploded with images. She saw flashes of her life, her childhood, her family, her friends, moments she'd forgotten long ago. But it wasn't just her memories. She saw other places, other worlds, strange landscapes filled with creatures she couldn't begin to describe. It was overwhelming, like her mind was being downloaded into something far greater than herself. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The sphere retracted, and the beings stepped back. Emily felt the paralysis lift, and she sat up, gasping for air. She wanted to yell at them, to demand answers, but before she could, the voice spoke again. "You have shown us much. Now we will show you." The room changed. The walls dissolved, revealing a vast expanse of stars. Emily was no longer in a small room. She was standing on what felt like a balcony, looking out at the universe. It was breathtakingly beautiful and utterly terrifying. She could see planets, glowing nebulas, and distant galaxies. She felt small, insignificant in the face of such vastness. One of the beings gestured, and a holographic image appeared in front of her. It showed Earth, her home, spinning peacefully in the void. But then the image zoomed out, revealing a fleet of ships like the one she was on. They were moving toward Earth. "Why?" Emily whispered, finally finding her voice. The voice in her mind answered, "Your world is in danger. We are not the only ones watching." Emily's blood ran cold. She didn't understand what they meant, but the implication was clear. Earth was being observed, possibly targeted, by forces far beyond human comprehension. She looked at the beings, her fear giving way to desperation. "What can I do?" she asked. The beings didn't answer immediately. Instead, they exchanged a series of glances that she couldn't interpret. Finally, the one who had spoken before stepped forward. "You will remember," it said. "When the time comes, you will know." Before she could ask what that meant, the world around her dissolved again. She felt herself falling, spinning through darkness. And then, with a jolt, she woke up. She was lying in the middle of the road, the stars shining brightly above her. The ship was gone, and the night was silent once more. Emily sat up, her heart pounding. She was back in her clothes, and everything seemed normal. But as she looked up at the sky, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. She checked her phone. It was 3:33 a.m., exactly 3 hours since she'd first seen the light. She made her way home, her mind racing. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination? But when she looked in the mirror, she saw a faint mark on her temple, almost like a tiny scar. And deep in her mind, she felt a presence. Something, or someone was still with her. Would you believe her story? If you've ever looked up at the night sky and wondered what's out there, maybe you felt it too. Subscribe to my channel for more stories that make you question the world around you.